Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, in this video, I'd like to talk about two very important recent criminals. I mean, really, really severe, extreme, like serial killer type criminals, and that would be Rex Heuermann in Long Island and Lucy Letby in England. Okay, Lucy Letby is I think she's in her early 30s now, but she was in her mid to, like, say, mid 20s, working as a nurse, apparently a very good nurse in the national health system of Great Britain. I think she was located near Wales, in the UK, and she managed to kill at least eight neonatal patients, very young babies. Um, so I mean that's like a shocking statistic, and she's like supposed to be like the one of the worst or the worst serial killer in British history, as far as like killing children. Female, I guess the worst female serial killer when it comes to killing children. I mean, it's really extreme, really serious case. And then Rex Heuermann also apparently killed quite a few people. He's only charged with, I think, 4 murders right now, but I think he may be responsible for several more murders of sex workers in Long Island. Um, and so we're talking about two people who, I guess, what I find really similar between Rex Heuermann and Lucy Letby is that the magnitude of their crimes is like in a shocking contrast to how vanilla and how ordinary and boring and kind of dorky they seem in real life. They just seem like they're not the typical picture we have of like the sort of the edgy kind of the edgy psychopath. Even Ted Bundy looked sort of like a kind of looked like a preppy kind of almost like a Republican. But when you really saw him in the interviews, you could see that he had kind of an intensity, kind of an edge to him. Whereas I think Lucy Letby and Rex Heuermann, they're just dorks. I mean, they just look like vanilla dorks. Like there's nothing. They look totally harmless. And they look like they would have nothing to do with anything improper. And so it's just like completely incongruous what they have done, because they've take their crime has gone to the extreme. And there's nothing in their appearance or even in their history that would even give a signal. Ted Bundy, for example, he had a big problem with shoplifting. He had a lot of actual behavioral issues. If you actually go back and look at the breadcrumbs, you can see that Ted Bundy had a lot of sort of like kind of antisocial characteristics starting from a very young age. Okay, whereas with Rex Heuermann and Lucy Letby, you get no, aside from the areas where they were committing their crimes, you get no, there's no hint, you know, no real suggestion. I mean, I guess with Rex Heuermann, there was that one incident where he's in high school and he apparently pulled some prank in the theater, like the theater club or whatever, or he was involved in some theater production in his high school, and he did something where he like hoisted somebody up on a rope or something in the theater, kind of like as a gimmick or whatever. But aside from that, I think maybe some people noticed that Rex Heuermann could lose his temper occasionally, but that basically he was bullied. So he really wasn't considered like a bully, as a high school student. So what can we learn from these two cases? I mean, because I think these two cases are really going to revolutionize a little bit how we think of criminal insanity, criminal psychology, and maybe it could even help us inform like what really is going on with a lot of psychopathy. Okay, because really, when we talk about psychopathy, we're sort of reverse engineering. We see the results, and then we sort of have to reverse engineer and figure out what could happen to a person to make them the way they are. And we notice that, the end product is that you can have people that are very insensitive, people that don't have a startle response, people that don't feel stress, don't feel fear, don't notice fear in other people. But what might explain how a person gets to that point? Okay, leaving aside the fact that maybe some people could be born, they just come out of the womb and they're just born with that temperament. But what could make somebody become a fully formed, active, criminal to the level of, let's say psychopathy, or something so shocking as like killing a lot of people. All right, so I think what Lucy Letby and Rex Heuermann have to teach me, and really makes me think about, is how we should consider sort of like a narcissistic stage of development. Okay. And I want to go ahead and maybe try to redefine that a little bit, because, the way it's defined to me, the way I've seen it defined is sort of like said to be the stage of development where you start to individuate yourself, and you're able to distinguish that you are different from others. Okay. Now I want to change that a little bit. I want to propose a different definition for narcissistic development, which is maybe there's a stage, okay, and maybe it's not so young, like 2 or 3. Maybe it's as you get older, so like say 5, 6, 7, and also in adolescence. Okay, there may be a stage where your personality kind of settles on sort of a baseline of what you believe is the amount of discomfort you should feel in life. Okay. And then how we condition ourselves to actually have a certain amount of discomfort in our baseline. Okay. In other words, how much you believe you should take on as your sort of baseline of existence. How uncomfortable should life be, or how uncomfortable are you willing to live your life? Okay. What level of discomfort are you willing to accept in your life, okay, as a point of what you believe? And then how much do you actually take on and condition yourself to be able to carry in life? Okay. Now I can say, because I've had cluster B, I have been diagnosed with NPD. I can say that looking back, I did not really believe that a person should have to carry that much discomfort. And I never adapted myself to carrying that much discomfort in life. So my ability to be uncomfortable was very limited, and in a serious way, in a way that affected my behavior. Okay. So I'd like to propose that there's 2 stages. Okay. One stage is our beliefs about life. Okay. How much discomfort do we believe a person should carry? And then secondly, to what degree have we conditioned ourselves to actually be able to have a long-standing, to be able to carry in a long-standing manner a certain level of the discomforts and the frustrations that real life actually has. You know what I mean? So that, whatever period that is where a person forms those beliefs and actually conditions themselves, it may be from age 8 to 18, or maybe age 8 to 22. I don't know, but maybe for each person it's different. But there's got to be a place in life where you develop both an attitude about how uncomfortable life should be, and then how much you're conditioned to be able to actually carry the discomforts of life. Okay, so I'll go ahead and say roughly it's between age 6 and age 21, something like that, because that pretty much establishes basically the baseline, and that's sort of like how you establish kind of your metabolic tolerances, whatever. Okay, so what happens when a person does not believe that life should be too uncomfortable, and is not really able to tolerate like a broad spectrum of discomfort in life? Okay, let's say you're able to tolerate discomfort, but only in academics, or you're able to tolerate discomfort, but only in your professional life, but you don't really believe that in your whole life you should be able to tolerate a certain amount of discomfort. Okay, so what happens in that? What happens if a person really doesn't develop a realistic attitude and a realistic conditioning in terms of life's discomfort? Okay, so what could happen? Okay, well, for some people who may be very sensitive, okay, some people who may be very sensitive and who may not have a lot of tolerance for discomfort, okay, if they haven't conditioned themselves to feel discomfort, okay, and to carry it, okay, and if they haven't developed even a belief that a person should be able to carry a certain amount of discomfort, okay, if they're sensitive enough, okay, the natural denial mechanisms, the natural dissociation mechanisms, the natural avoidance mechanisms, okay, will start to possibly filter out how we process our information in the world, okay, how we process information in the world, and how we process our situation in the world, how we assess our situation in the world. Will start to filter information so as not to disturb what makes us uncomfortable, okay, because we're not conditioned for discomfort. We're going to sort of filter reality, and we're going to deal with reality sort of piecemeal, so as not to feel what we're not conditioned to feel, and what we don't even believe we should feel. Okay. So in the most extreme cases, okay, everybody's got different defense mechanisms. Okay. So Sorry about the dogs outside there. Anyway, everybody's got different defense mechanisms. Okay, some people have very acute denial processes. Okay, some people have very extreme dissociation processes. Okay, in our brains. Okay, and some people have very, very severe avoidance and compartmentalization in their brain. Okay, so if you combine an inability and a lack of belief that we should actually carry frustration and discomfort in life. Okay. And if we're not conditioned to carry discomfort, okay, then our natural dissociation and our natural avoidance and denial mechanisms, if they're severe enough, they can sort of fragment our whole personality. Okay. So that we're not fully in touch with all the reality of our personality because it would be too unpleasant to deal with. Okay. And we're not conditioned to handle that level of unpleasant, uncomfortable experience. Okay, so like in the case of Rex Heuermann, I think clearly the case with Rex Heuermann is that he's kind of like not far from an incel, okay, in the sense that he's very dorky. He's not really attractive. He's very tall, but he's very kind of awkward, okay? So he may be just bursting with sexual desires, and he may be just lost in fantasy for the most beautiful women in his high school class or whatever. But because he's so unattractive and he's so awkward and so extra sensitive, he may not have had any even the beginning of any ability to approach any attractive girls. Okay, and that's sort of like the incel problem. All right, he may have ended up getting married eventually, but in those key important years when he's developing his sexuality, he didn't have the freedom to relate to people his own age and maybe deal with attractive people that he might have really fantasized about. Okay, because he's just too much of a dork. Basically he's too sensitive, he's too awkward, and it's sort of like that incel problem where it can feel like a real injustice. Okay, and so because that's so uncomfortable, okay, and because he may have been stuck at that stage of development where he's not willing to carry that discomfort and just accept it. Okay, there may be a part of him that does not accept that discomfort, okay, and cannot accept it. All right. So basically, we're dealing with somebody who doesn't have that ability to endure, to live an enduring life in discomfort and in frustration like other people can. Okay. And that may have been so acute, maybe his sexual desires, his sexual fantasies, that he sort of got locked into a place where he had to kind of fragment his sexuality and not integrate it into his whole personhood, because that part of himself was just too painful. And so he, through the powers of dissociation and through the powers of denial, he just kind of compartmentalized his sexuality as sort of like disembodied from his actual ordinary self. So that's how he could go to college and be successful in a career. And even though he's kind of a dork and a nerd, he pisses people off in the architecture world. He's probably not even really respected, but he's still able to maintain a totally separate personality in his professional life. Okay. And then that sexuality stuff, that's like a separate world that's completely detached because it's too painful for him to integrate that into his regular life. Okay. Because he hasn't developed that ability to live with chronic frustration. Okay. And to be honest, it's hard to live with frustration. It's hard to be a dork. It's hard to be somebody who's not attractive. It's painful, to never be able to satisfy your fantasies, to be attracted to people, you can't even talk to, they wouldn't even want to talk to you, like nice looking girls and stuff. They wouldn't even want to be your friend, and so that's got to hurt. But it's better to have the hurt and live with it and endure it and just let it be painful than to split it off and let it be a satellite that you're not integrated. Okay. It's like a satellite that's not integrated into you. So you lose touch and it becomes like a separate entity. Okay. And once something becomes a separate entity and it's like disembodied from your core personhood, okay, you lose control of it. And it becomes literally a separate operator, okay, that has its own lack of control. Okay. And so as a coward, because he's not willing to feel the pain and just be a dork in pain and not just suffer the fact that he's a dork. Okay. Now that separate entity, that sexuality, now because he's a coward and he can't tolerate the pain, he goes looking for behaviors to satisfy himself. Okay. as opposed to being courageous and just being painful, just being frustrated, just feeling pain, you know, just feeling despair, you know, that I'm a loser. I'm not attractive to women. It sucks. Just letting it hurt. No, he goes looking for behaviors to gratify himself, almost like in a fantasy, like what would it be like if I could relate to people? But because that sexuality is so set apart, and he hasn't reconciled his resentments that women don't like him. Okay, all these things are set apart. Like the sexuality is a set apart satellite; it's not integrated, and then also his resentments. That's too uncomfortable. How much he resents people. How maybe some. He may also have some aggressive tendencies, okay, some violent tendencies. And instead of just integrating that into his self, a lot of us have violent tendencies, but they're integrated into ourselves. But for him, that's so uncomfortable and that's so incompatible. He just, everything he puts off as a satellite, everything he can't handle, he sort of puts off as a satellite. And those disembodied entities, the sexuality, the aggression, the resentment, all those things operate outside of his central control. Okay, and that free orbiting satellite now has the opportunity maybe to get involved in behavior where he doesn't have the full regulation because he hasn't integrated it into himself. It's almost like a separate entity. Okay, so then, you know, dark hours of the night, you know, when his wife's out of town or when he has free time, or, you know, in moments where he gets away from his family, he starts getting, you know, buying all these cell phones, getting in touch with all these, sex workers, and out comes all this aggression and all this unbounded satellite resentment, aggression, and, you know, seething sexuality. You know, must have a tremendous amount of sexual energy. So you can see how that could result in the worst case in a terrible, criminal behavior. Okay. And I mean, terribly dangerous, you know, but I really think that what I see in these people, because I've seen the interview with Rex Heuermann where he's interviewing some guy interviewing about his architecture business or whatever. And you can tell that, you know, the personhood, you know, the actual personhood of Rex Heuermann, he's a total dork. He seems harmless. He's actually, he loves to talk about, like, you know, building codes and all these dorky, you know, trivia and stuff. And you can tell that whatever sexuality he has, whatever aggression he has, whatever resentment he has, is all totally dissociated into some satellite that's not in him. It's separate, you know. So we have to be really careful if we don't go through that narcissistic phase of development where we learn to accept a certain amount of discomfort and pain. Okay, and if we don't condition ourselves to be courageous and to carry pain in our lives, to be painful, to suffer, just to suffer, you know, because there's a lot to suffer in life. You know, some of us are dorks. Some of us are not attractive to people of the opposite sex. Some of us may be married in a relationship, and then we think we may be in love with somebody else, but, you know, we're already committed to our lives and our children, and we really don't want to get a divorce. And so we have to suffer, maybe thinking like, God, maybe this isn't really the relationship I was born to be in, or whatever, who knows? But some people are willing to just suffer that. And that can be a richer experience and more courageous than just falling to whatever you feel and not accepting suffering. Okay, some suffering is actually maybe realistic, you know, for our lives. You know, maybe I have a job where I think, like, 20 years into the job, I think this is not really the job for me, but I've already been 20 years in this job, you know. But maybe in a way it's better just to suffer that than just to become unstable and just to pretend you can start a new career when you're 50 years old or whatever. I mean, people will say you can do that, but in reality, you know, that's not being stable. That's not being mature, you know. But in this case, let's say somebody like Rex Heuermann, from a young age, when he had that opportunity at the narcissistic phase of development to decide how much discomfort he was willing to tolerate as a person and then to condition himself, he didn't allow himself to do that. And he didn't condition himself to do that. So then these really problematic parts of his life, he could not handle the discomfort of having those in him, in his personhood, and they got dissociated into satellites that are not integrated into his self. So you almost develop like satellite, like disembodied, like almost like demons, you know, and they're not really integrated into you. So we have to be really careful as people. You know, we don't realize, but we have different compartments. We have different different aspects of our personality. Okay. And if we can't handle pain, if we can't handle frustration, those things can become satellites and they become separate, and in the worst case, it can lead to real behavior problems. Okay. So now what do I think of Lucy Letby? Okay. Lucy Letby is fascinating because she's probably more vanilla and more innocent, and she's probably more harmless than Rex Heuermann. Okay, Rex Heuermann's a dork, but Lucy Letby is like a super dork. Okay, and probably also has that problem where she's probably not attractive, really not super attractive to people of the opposite sex. She's not edgy. She's not. There's nothing aggressive about her. I mean, she's just so completely passive, very vanilla, very prim, almost like exaggerated. Apparently she had like posters in her house, that said, let's see if I can find it. Like she had like her bed covers were embroidered with the words like "sweet dreams," and she had like a poster on her wall that said "love sparkles wherever you go." Like basically a person who's just like too vanilla, too almost exaggerated, like too innocent, too prim and proper, too straight. But the question with Lucy Letby is not how straight she is. It's not how prim and proper, how vanilla she is. But at that key stage of development, when she was in that narcissistic stage of development, where she had to determine how much discomfort was she willing to feel to accept as an adult or as a young adult. And then how much did she actually condition herself in life aside from her academics? Because I think in academics, she put herself out to be pretty, I think in academics, I think she actually did suffer the real frustration of being a student. But I'm just saying in life in general, how much did Lucy Letby condition herself to feel the discomforts of life? Okay. And maybe if she had like all of us, maybe some violent tendencies, maybe some aggressive tendencies, how much maybe she didn't tolerate discomfort because everything for her has to be cinnamon and sugar and bows and nice little posters and everything pink and teddy bears. Well, in that world, you can't really process, let's say, if you have aggressive tendencies or if you have frustrations, you can't process that, so they become satellites. Okay. And those disembodied satellites, who knows, maybe Lucy Letby, like a lot of people, had maybe some aggressive tendencies, maybe some frustrated tendencies, maybe some resentments, who knows, maybe a sense that she wasn't a very good person or just whatever. But some of the darker parts of herself, they got sort of driven out of her because she couldn't tolerate the discomfort of having those kind of unpleasant characteristics. And they got separated out into satellites where basically now she doesn't have control over those things. Okay. So she probably didn't even realize she had this problem because you unconsciously drive things out of you. It's all unconscious. She probably just thought she was just the most innocent, the most vanilla person in the world. She had no idea probably she had these uncomfortable things because we subconsciously put those out if we can't tolerate them. Okay. So basically, she's finally around. She's never committed any crime. She has a reputation for being a boring student, just a good student, an innocent person. And nobody who knew her could believe she would commit a crime, right? But then she finally becomes a nurse, and then she finally passes the qualifications to be a NICU nurse, a neonatal intensive care, a neonatal nurse. Okay, I don't know if they have NICU in the British health system, but it was a neonatal nurse, neonatal department. So she gets that qualification to be a neonatal nurse, and now she's around these really innocent babies, these really vulnerable babies. And she doesn't realize she has these satellite aspects of herself that are not integrated. Okay. So she doesn't even realize she has aggression that she doesn't even process for herself because that would be too painful for her. Okay. So she doesn't realize she has these kind of almost inhuman sort of, sort of darker characteristics, but then you add to the mix, okay, that she also has this frustration like Rex Heuermann that she probably doesn't have a lot of success with men. And then she's in a place where she's around these attractive doctors, and there is an attractive doctor. She has a crush on this doctor. Okay. And then suddenly she wants to have attention from this doctor. And because she is actually a good nurse, I think she wants to be known and recognized by the doctor and respected as maybe a good healthcare professional. Okay. So that in this very immature way, she sort of accidentally finds herself in situations where she has to be a hero and maybe impress this doctor. I'm imagining the most immature, the most immature way of thinking, but you can see how it would happen. Okay. And the only problem is that she doesn't realize she has these disembodied, very aggressive characteristics. Okay. And so maybe if she's caught up in the enthusiasm, and believe me, for anybody who has cluster B disorders, enthusiasm is a very dangerous state of mind. Okay. Enthusiasm is where all the bad things happen. Okay. So I'll bet you Lucy Letby got stirred up by her enthusiasm as she was attracted to this nice doctor. Okay. And that enthusiasm probably was like a blender. It like blended her brain. She basically liquefied her brain by that enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is where everything bad happens. And worst of all, she had these disembodied satellites that had some aggression or some ability to have a hostility towards vulnerable people. And somehow that it was like a perfect storm. Like it's kind of like with Lori Vallow. You could say that Lori Vallow, if she had never met Chad Daybell, it might not have completed the chain reaction to make her so dangerous. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like that with Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby, if she never met that one doctor, had that one crush, it might not have completed the chain reaction to make all the dominoes fall. You know what I mean? I'm just imagining. Maybe not, but I'm just speculating. But I'm just thinking that, with that enthusiasm of having a crush on that doctor, plus maybe some disembodied aggression that she could not integrate into her personhood, and all that came together in the perfect storm. And then maybe almost unconsciously, she's around these babies and she finds herself like letting herself not be careful with the air in the syringes so that air would go into their veins. These tiny little babies, just a little bit of air could cause a tremendous damage, embolism, to these premature babies, or maybe like overfeeding them, messing up with their insulin and just really doing things very dangerous, so that suddenly she could, be involved in like resuscitation or in the drama of having to deal with the parents, maybe in a twisted way when she had to deal with parents who had lost their babies. Maybe indirectly she thought that doctor would respect how bold she was and how competent she was to be able to handle families, grieving a dead child or whatever. Maybe she, in a weird way, she was trying to create this ideal like superstar nurse who could handle the worst. Maybe indirectly trying to impress this guy she had a crush on, this doctor. But the bottom line is that she had to have some aggression, something in her that was like a bully, that like had a real hostile attitude towards vulnerability. And maybe that was because maybe there's some bullying we don't know about with her younger life, that became a part of her. But the thing is that she couldn't handle the bad feelings of that. So it got dissociated into like a satellite, okay, that's not connected, that's not integrated. And so for whatever reason, she took the opportunity, maybe unconsciously, to do little things, to be not careful with these babies and to put them in situations where their lives could be in danger. And so I guess these two cases, Rex Heuermann, Lucy Letby, to me, this is to remind all of us how important it is in the narcissistic stage of our lives. It's so important that we form a realistic expectation. Okay. All of us, a realistic expectation of what level of pain, what level of discomfort we're willing to carry. Okay. As an enduring baseline. Okay. We have to believe in it. We have to have a belief that a person ought to be able to carry a certain amount of discomfort, and we have to condition ourselves to actually be able to carry what we believe we should carry. Okay, because otherwise, the realities of life can often be so uncomfortable that we have the risk of sort of splitting little pieces of ourselves, okay, that are too uncomfortable, and then we have these satellites that are not within our personhood. Okay. And those satellites can end up creating the risk of dangerous behavior because our whole self is not fully contained in our executive personhood. There's sort of like we have our executive personhood, but then we have these split off satellites and we don't really have control over those satellites. So I think we should never underestimate the powers of dissociation and denial and avoidance. And in the wrong configuration combination, that can be very dangerous. Okay, so it all goes back to how much discomfort we're conditioned and we believe we should be able to carry. So that's why I think the narcissistic stage is so important. And Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.